My name is Claire Ashton. I am 34 years old. I am a licensed physical therapist. I have a savings account that I am actually proud of. I have a one-bedroom apartment with a balcony that looks out over a small park, and every single morning when I drink my coffee and watch the pigeons argue over a pretzel, I think the same thing. I earned this. Nobody handed it to me. And nobody is ever going to take it from me again. But for 9 years before that balcony and that coffee and that feeling of peace, I was living in a spare bedroom in my aunt and uncle's house on Clover Ridge Lane in Denton, a suburb outside of Atlanta, and I was paying them $2,100 a month in rent. Every month. On time. By automatic bank transfer with the memo line that read room and board. 9 years. $2,100 a month. $226,800 total. And the entire time they told me it was helping them keep up with the mortgage. They said they needed me. They said I was family and that family helps family. They said the housing market in Atlanta was brutal and that without my contribution they would have to make very difficult choices. My Aunt Patricia would tear up sometimes when she said it. She would reach across the kitchen table and squeeze my hand and say, "Claire, what would we do without you?" And I believed her. I believed her completely because I was 23 years old and I had just graduated from my physical therapy program with $48,000 in student loan debt, and I did not have anywhere else to go, and she was my mother's sister, and in our family that meant something. My mother passed away when I was 19. Ovarian cancer diagnosed in the spring, gone by October. My father had left when I was 11 and no one talked about him much. After my mother died, my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Gerald were the closest thing to parents I had left. They took me in for the last 2 years of college. They helped me with groceries and let me use their car. When I got into the physical therapy program 3 hours away, they drove me to orientation. When I graduated, they drove down for the ceremony and Patricia cried happy tears and Gerald shook my hand and said, "Your mama would have been so proud." So when they said they needed help with the mortgage, I did not question it. I signed the little agreement they had typed up on Gerald's computer. It looked official. It had a line for my signature and everything. $2,100 per month. First of each month. No exceptions. I told myself it was temporary. A year, maybe 2. Just long enough to get my loans under control and save up enough for a real apartment. I was making decent money by then. My first job out of school paid me $51,000 a year, and within 4 years I was up to $68,000. I could have moved out much sooner than I did. The truth is that I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning them. Every time I thought about finding my own place, Patricia would mention something. The furnace needed replacing. The property taxes had gone up. Gerald's hours at the plant had been cut. And I would feel that familiar tightening in my chest. The feeling that leaving would be selfish. That good nieces stayed. I stayed for 9 years. The person who finally cracked it open was not a forensic accountant or a lawyer or a neighbor with a watering can. It was my coworker Dana. Dana worked the front desk at the physical therapy clinic where I had been employed for 6 years. She was a talker, which I normally found exhausting, but on a slow Tuesday afternoon in late September she started telling me about her cousin who lived out in Denton and how the whole Clover Ridge Lane area had really appreciated in value in the last several years. Great neighborhood, she said. Especially now that most of those original homeowners have paid their places off. No more mortgage stress, she laughed. Must be nice. I smiled and said yes, it must be nice. And then I drove home that evening and sat in my car in my aunt and uncle's driveway for about 15 minutes before I went inside. That night, after Patricia had gone to bed and Gerald was watching television, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Gwinnett County Property Records website. It was a public database. Anyone could use it. I typed in the address of Clover Ridge Lane and waited. The mortgage had been paid in full. The satisfaction of mortgage had been recorded with the county nearly 3 years before I had ever moved into that spare bedroom. The date was right there. The document number was right there. The lien holder had released the property. Free and clear. I sat at the kitchen table in that house that they owned completely and had owned completely for 9 years longer than I had known, and I looked at that document on my screen and I did the math. 9 years. $2,100 a month. $226,800. Paid to cover a mortgage that did not exist. I did not cry that night. I thought I would. I had cried plenty of times in that house. Cried when I missed my mother. Cried when a promotion did not come through. Cried once when Patricia said something sharp about my weight that she later claimed was a joke. But that night I did not cry. I felt something colder and quieter than tears. I felt like a machine that had just been switched on. Precise. Calculating. Ready. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I called a woman named Renata Voss, who was a forensic accountant based in Atlanta. I had found her through an online search, and something about the professional directness of her website made me trust her immediately. I explained the situation in about 5 minutes. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Send me your bank records and I will tell you what we are working with." I sent her 9 years of automatic transfer statements. Every single one time-stamped. Every single one with the memo line that read room and board. She called me back 48 hours later. "Miss Ashton," she said, "your documentation is extremely clean. Every payment is traceable. The property records confirm what you told me. And here is the part you need to sit down for. If your aunt and uncle have been collecting rental income from you for 9 years and they have not been reporting it on their federal tax returns, that is a significant problem for them. Rental income is taxable. The IRS does not make exceptions because the renter is a family member." I asked her how I would know if they had reported it. She told me that the relevant form was called Schedule E. She told me that there were ways to find out. And she gave me the name of a tax attorney named Warren Cole who handled exactly these kinds of cases. I met Warren Cole in his office the following Thursday. He was a tall man in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful, measured speech of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. He reviewed Renata's preliminary findings and the property records and my bank statements, and then he leaned back in his chair and looked at me over the top of his glasses. He said, "Miss Ashton, I want to be honest with you about what we are likely dealing with. If your relatives collected over $200,000 in rental income and failed to declare it, they are looking at back taxes, penalties and interest that could easily reach $60,000 to $80,000. Possibly more depending on their other income." He paused. "And there is something else. You mentioned that their son Derek has been doing their taxes for the past several years." I nodded. Derek was 3 years older than me. He was an accountant at a mid-size firm in Buckhead. He had done Patricia and Gerald's taxes as a family favor for as long as I could remember. Warren said if Derek prepared returns that omitted this rental income and he is a licensed professional, he could be looking at his own professional consequences. Depending on what he knew and when he knew it. I thought about Derek. I thought about the Christmas dinners where he sat at the head of the table because Gerald's back was bad and Derek was the eldest. I thought about how Patricia called him her rock. I thought about the time he had seen my automatic transfer on Patricia's phone when I was sitting right there in the room and had said nothing. Not a word. I thought maybe Derek knew exactly what he was doing. Warren asked me what I wanted to do. He laid out my options the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Careful, precise, no emotion attached. I could file a whistleblower complaint with the IRS and potentially receive a percentage of any collected back taxes. I could pursue civil action to recover the payments on grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation. I could do both. Or I could do nothing. I told him I needed a few days to think. What I was not telling him was that my cousin Marissa had just called me the previous evening to invite me to her engagement party. Marissa was Derek's younger sister. She was the one Whitmore cousin I actually liked. She was warm and funny, and she had always been kind to me even when the rest of the family treated me like a boarder rather than a blood relative. Her fiancé Marcus was a good man. They were having the engagement party at a rented event space in Midtown Atlanta in 3 weeks. Patricia had called the morning after Marissa to remind me about the party and then to add with that particular sweetness that was never quite sweet enough that she hoped I was planning to say a few words about what family meant. Since you are so good with people, Claire. Since everyone at the clinic loves you so much. Just a short little speech about gratitude and belonging. The Hendersons will be there. Marcus's whole family. It would mean the world to Marissa. I said of course. When I hung up I sat very still for a long time. They wanted me to stand in front of a room full of people and talk about gratitude and belonging while sitting on the knowledge that they had taken over $200,000 from me under false pretenses. I called Renata that afternoon. I asked her how solid the documentation was. She said it was airtight. I asked her if there was any scenario in which the payments could be legitimately characterized as something other than taxable rental income. She said no. A recurring fixed payment for the use of a defined space is rental income. Full stop. I asked her one more question. I asked whether the information I had gathered from public records and my own bank statements was mine to use however I chose. She said yes. Every document you have compiled is either your own financial record or a public county document. No laws have been broken in obtaining any of it. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called my friend Simone. Simone had been my closest friend since we were both in our physical therapy internship program. She was sharp and perceptive and she had always been suspicious of my living arrangement in a way I had not fully appreciated until now. She drove over that evening and I showed her everything. The property records. The bank statements. Renata's preliminary report. She sat with it for a long time. Then she said, Claire, they have been collecting $2,100 a month from you on a completely false premise for 9 years. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a decision they made and renewed every single month for 9 years. I know. She asked what I was going to do. I told her about the engagement party. I told her about the speech Patricia had requested. I watched something shift in Simone's expression. She said, when is it? 3 weeks. She said, I am going to be there. I spent the 2 weeks before the party doing something I had never done in my adult life. I stopped being the person who absorbed things quietly and started preparing. I met with Warren Cole a second time. He walked me through what a civil claim would look like. The basis would be fraudulent misrepresentation. They had told me they needed my payments for a mortgage that did not exist. That was a material misstatement that I had relied on to my financial detriment. He said it was a strong case. He said courts do not look kindly on family members who exploit grief and financial dependence to extract money from a vulnerable young person. He used that phrase. Vulnerable young person. And something about hearing it applied to 23-year-old me, the one who had just lost her mother and had nowhere to go and was handed a typed agreement across a kitchen table, made me feel a complicated mix of grief and fury that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to manage. I also did something practical in those 2 weeks. I took screenshots of the county property records. I printed them. I organized my bank statements into a single bound document showing every transfer from the first to the last. I put it all in a folder and I kept that folder in my car. I was not going to bring it into the party room. That felt too aggressive. Too staged. But I wanted it nearby. Just in case. 3 days before the engagement party, Gerald called me. He almost never called me directly. That task was usually delegated to Patricia. His voice on the phone was the careful, controlled voice of a man who thought he was being strategic. He said, Claire, we are looking forward to the party. He said he and Patricia were proud of how the family was coming together around Marissa and Marcus. He said he was going to say a few words at the dinner about the people who had held the family together over the years. The people who had contributed. He let that word sit for a second. Contributed. And then he said, we are grateful for everything you have done. For staying with us. For being part of this family. When he hung up, I understood immediately what was being constructed. He was going to publicly frame my 9 years of payments as a voluntary generous contribution. He was going to position me as someone who had been supported by this family and had given back out of love and loyalty. He was going to establish that narrative in front of Marcus's entire family before I had any opportunity to offer a different version of events. It was a preemptive move. And it was not subtle. 2 hours later, Derek texted me. He had never texted me in his life. The message said, "Hey Claire, looking forward to Saturday. Let me know if you need a ride. Everything good with you? Everything good with you?" From the man who had signed tax returns for 9 years that omitted over $200,000 in rental income from his parents. I showed Simone the text. She looked at it and then looked at me and said, "They know that you know. Or they suspect it." I said. "Either way," she said, "Saturday is not going to be the party they planned." The engagement venue was a beautifully restored event space in Midtown called the Garrison. Exposed brick, original hardwood floors, a bar along one wall, and string lights overhead that gave everything a warm amber glow. There were about 90 guests. Round tables with white linens and small floral centerpieces. A dance floor that would not be used for another 2 hours. A catering team in matching black aprons circulating with trays of stuffed mushrooms and shrimp cocktail. Marissa looked genuinely radiant. She was wearing a soft sage green dress and her hair was pinned up with little pearl pins, and when she saw me across the room she came straight over and hugged me hard and said, "I am so glad you are here," and I believed her completely because Marissa had never been anything but real with me. I hugged her back and meant it. Marcus's family occupied the tables near the front. His parents were warm people. His father Lawrence ran a construction company and his mother Beverly had the kind of easy laugh that immediately made a room feel safer. They had welcomed Marissa with what looked like genuine warmth, and I found myself hoping very hard that tonight would not damage that. Simone was at a table near the side wall. She raised her glass slightly when she caught my eye. Patricia intercepted me before I could find my seat. She was wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress and her hair was freshly done. Her smile was the wide practiced one that she used for audiences. She said, "Claire, you look wonderful, sweetheart." She kissed my cheek. She squeezed my arm. She said, "I am so glad you are going to say something tonight. It means everything to Marissa." And then she lowered her voice just slightly. "Just something simple and heartfelt. About what family has meant to you. About the home we gave you. The home we gave you." I smiled. I said, "I have prepared something." She patted my arm and moved away toward Lawrence and Beverly Henderson, who were standing near the bar. I found my seat. I was at a table toward the middle of the room. Not the family table up front with Gerald and Patricia and Derek and his wife. Not the Henderson family table. Middle of the room. Present but not prominent. Dinner was salmon with roasted vegetables and a very good risotto. I ate slowly and watched the front of the room. Gerald was in his element. He moved from table to table like a man who had planned this carefully. He spent a long time with the Hendersons. He laughed at something Lawrence said and clapped him on the shoulder. He was building something. I could see it. At 8 o'clock a soft chime brought the room to attention. Gerald stood at the front with a handheld microphone and the easy confidence of a man who believed this moment was completely under his control. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about how proud he and Patricia were of Marissa. He said Marcus was gaining a daughter-in-law with more heart than he probably knew what to do with, and the room laughed warmly. He talked about the Henderson family and how honored the Ashtons were to be joining with them. And then he said, "I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the people who have held this family together. The ones who sacrificed and contributed so that we could all be here tonight in this kind of comfort." He looked at me across the room. "Our niece Claire has been with us for 9 years now. She has been a part of our home, our daily lives, our family. We are deeply grateful for her contribution to this household." He raised his glass. "To family." The room echoed it. Glasses went up. People smiled at me. Beverly Henderson gave me a little nod that said, "How touching." A few people who did not know the full picture were thinking, "What a lovely tight-knit family." Gerald lowered the microphone and looked at me. Claire. Would you like to come say a few words? I stood up. Simone's eyes found mine across the room. She gave me one small nod. I walked to the front. Gerald handed me the microphone with a smile that did not reach his eyes. I looked out at 90 people under warm amber lights. Marissa and Marcus in the front row looking hopeful and slightly nervous. The Hendersons next to them. Patricia at the family table with her practiced smile. Derek beside her with no expression at all. I said thank you, Gerald. I took a breath. I said I do want to talk about what family means tonight because I have been thinking about it a great deal recently. The room settled into quiet. People held their drinks. I said Gerald is right that I have been living in their home for 9 years. He is right that I have contributed financially. For 9 years I paid $2,100 a month in rent. That is $226,800. A small ripple moved through the room. I said I paid it because Patricia and Gerald told me they needed help covering the mortgage on that property. They said without my contribution they would have to make very difficult choices. I believed them. I was 23 years old and I had just lost my mother and I was grateful to have a place to land and I believed them completely. Patricia's smile had gone rigid. I said it was not until a few weeks ago that I learned something I should share here tonight because Gerald just invited me up to talk about contribution and gratitude and I want to make sure everyone has the full picture. I paused. I said according to the Gwinnett County property records which are publicly available to anyone with an internet connection, the mortgage on the Clover Ridge Lane property was paid off in full before I ever moved in. The satisfaction of mortgage was recorded with the county 2 years and 4 months before I signed their rental agreement. The room went very still. Lawrence Henderson set down his glass. I said I am not sharing this to hurt anyone tonight and I am especially not sharing it to cast a shadow on Marissa and Marcus because they deserve nothing but joy. I am sharing it because Gerald stood at this microphone and implied that I owe this family something. That my continued generosity is expected. And I need the people in this room to understand what the actual numbers are before anyone accepts that framing. Gerald was on his feet. His voice was sharp and tight. Claire, this is not the time or the place. I said with respect, Gerald, you chose the time and the place when you handed me this microphone. Patricia stood up. She was doing the thing she always did, which was to speak softly so that her words would not be the ones people remembered as aggressive. She said, sweetheart, you have had a hard few weeks at work. You have been under so much stress. Perhaps we should step outside. I said I am not stressed, Patricia. I am a finance professional adjacent person who spent 9 years making automatic bank transfers with time-stamped records and I am quite clear on the numbers. Derek spoke for the first time. He said from his chair without standing, which I noticed. He said these are private family financial matters that are not appropriate for this setting. Lawrence Henderson said from the front row quietly but in a voice that carried, if she is saying what I think she is saying, it is not a private matter. It is a factual matter. He looked at Gerald. Is what she is saying accurate? Was the property paid off before she moved in? Gerald started to speak. Stopped. Looked at Patricia. Patricia said there were other expenses. Maintenance. Property taxes. Utilities. It was never just the mortgage we needed help with. We never said it was only the mortgage. I said you absolutely said it was the mortgage. Every single time I raised the subject over 9 years you said the mortgage. I have a signed agreement that references the household mortgage. The word mortgage appears 3 times. Beverly Henderson had placed her hand over Marcus's on the table. Marcus was looking at Marissa. Marissa was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read. Not anger. More like someone who had been handed information they had suspected for years and did not know what to do with. Lawrence said, Gerald, I think we need to speak privately before this evening goes any further. Gerald turned red. He said, this is my daughter's engagement party and I will not have it turned into a courtroom by an ungrateful girl who has no idea what it cost us to take her in when she had nothing. The room went very quiet. I said, I know exactly what it cost you. It cost you nothing. You owned that house free and clear. You charged me rent for a mortgage that did not exist for 9 years, and you used my grief and my gratitude and my trust to do it. And you brought me up here to thank you for it in front of strangers. Gerald stepped toward me. Derek was on his feet now. A man stepped forward from near the side wall. I had not noticed him arrive. He was a medium-height man in his 50s in a very clean dark suit. He said in a conversational tone that somehow cut through everything else, "I represent Horizon Associates Legal Group. I was here this evening as a personal guest of Beverly Henderson, who is a longtime client." He looked at me. "Miss Ashton, I believe we should have a conversation at your earliest convenience." Beverly said quietly, "He is one of the best civil litigators in Atlanta." She said it to no one in particular, but everyone heard it. Gerald sat down. I handed the microphone back to the stand. I said, "I am truly happy for you, Marissa and Marcus. I mean that with everything I have." I walked back to my table and sat down next to Simone, who handed me a glass of water without saying anything. The room fractured into quiet, urgent conversations. Clusters of people with their heads together. The catering team had stopped moving and then remembered they were supposed to be invisible and started moving again. Marissa came to find me about 15 minutes later. She sat down across from me. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. She said, "Claire, how long have you known?" I said, "A few weeks." She said, "I did not know. I want you to know that. I did not know about the mortgage." I believed her. Marissa had always been the one in that family who looked at me like a person rather than a resource. She said, "Did Derek know?" I said, "I do not know for certain. But he has done their taxes for years and the rental income was never reported, and he is a licensed accountant." Something moved across her face. She looked toward the table where Derek was standing with Gerald, and they were talking in low, rapid voices. She said, "I am sorry, Claire." She said it plainly without decoration. Just, "I am sorry." And it landed differently than any of the elaborate apologies I had imagined in my head over the past few weeks. I said, "Thank you, Marissa." I said, "I genuinely hope tonight can still be something good for you and Marcus." I meant it. She nodded. She went back to Marcus, who put his arm around her immediately, and I watched his face over her shoulder, and he looked like a man who had just been handed a file on his future family and was processing it in real time with notable calm. I liked him more for that. Simone and I left about 20 minutes later. In the parking lot under the cold October air, I leaned against her car and let out the breath I had been holding for what felt like 9 years. She said, "You did it." I said, "I did not plan all of that." She said, "You did not need to plan it." She said, "Truth is surprisingly self-organizing." I went home to Clover Ridge Lane for the last time that night. I had already arranged with a friend to stay at her place starting the following week while I found my apartment. I packed what mattered. My physical therapy licensing documents. My laptop. 3 years of pay stubs and tax returns. The folder with the property records and bank statements. My mother's photograph from the mantel in my bedroom that Patricia had moved there from the living room when I moved in as a way of making me feel at home, and which I had always suspected was also a way of keeping my grief visible and therefore useful. I left before Patricia or Gerald came home from the party. I did not leave a note. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I sat in Warren Cole's office and he walked me through the civil complaint he intended to file. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Unjust enrichment. The core argument was clean. They had induced me to make recurring payments of $2,100 per month by representing that those payments were necessary to service a mortgage. The mortgage had been paid off before the rental arrangement began. The misrepresentation was material. My reliance was reasonable. The damages were $226,800. Warren said these cases almost always settle before trial because no defendant wants a jury to hear about a grieving 23-year-old being handed a rental agreement at a kitchen table by the aunt who took her in after her mother died. I nodded. I understood. I also told him about the tax situation. He connected me with Renata and together they filed the relevant disclosure with the IRS. I was not required to file a whistleblower complaint, but I was permitted to, and the documentation was so complete that the IRS field office in Atlanta opened an inquiry within 6 weeks. I heard about the audit secondhand through Marissa, who called me once to give me an update, not to accuse me of anything but simply because she thought I deserved to know what was happening. She said it quietly, like someone reading from a document. The IRS had assessed back taxes on 9 years of unreported rental income. The penalties and interest brought the total to just under $70,000. Gerald and Patricia had to liquidate part of their retirement savings to cover it. I asked about Derek. She was quiet for a moment. She said the Georgia Society of CPAs opened a professional review. She said the determination was that Derek had failed to exercise adequate professional judgment in preparing returns for clients who were also family members when he had reason to know that rental income existed. He received a formal censure and mandatory ethics supervision. She said he still had his license, but that 2 firms he had interviewed with in the past month had declined after the background check. I thanked her for telling me. I asked how she and Marcus were doing. She said the wedding was still on. She said Marcus's parents had needed some time, but that they were good people and good people could handle complicated information when it was given to them honestly. She said her own mother and father had not spoken to her in 3 weeks because she had refused to tell me the inquiry was my fault. She said I told them I would not do that because it was not your fault. I did not know what to say, so I just said, Marissa, I am really glad you are in my life. She said, same, Claire. Same. The civil case settled 8 months after I filed. The settlement amount was not what I had originally paid. It was not $226,800. It was $142,000. Warren explained that settlement is always a negotiation. That Patricia and Gerald's attorney had argued that some portion of the payments could reasonably be characterized as fair market rent for a room in a suburban Atlanta home, even absent the mortgage justification. Warren said we could have pushed harder, but that litigation is expensive and uncertain, and that $142,000 in hand was a better outcome than $200,000 in theory. I thought about it for a long time. $142,000. Not everything they took. But more than enough to matter. I said yes. They wired the funds 3 weeks later. I sat in my new apartment, which I had been renting for 6 months by then, and looked at my bank balance and felt something I did not have a word for at first. It took me a few days to identify it. The word was restitution. Not victory. Not closure. Restitution. The partial correction of an imbalance. It would never be perfect. The 9 years were gone. The trust was gone. But $142,000 was real, and it was mine, and no one had done me any favors to put it there. I used $40,000 to pay off my remaining student loans in full. I put $60,000 into an investment account. The rest went into the down payment fund that I am building for an actual home of my own. I bought a very good coffee maker to celebrate. It sits on my kitchen counter, and every morning I grind the beans fresh and I make a proper cup and I take it out to the balcony and I watch the park below, and I think about the version of me who sat at that kitchen table at 23 years old and signed a piece of paper because she was grieving and grateful and had nowhere else to go. I do not hate that girl. She trusted people she was supposed to be able to trust. She worked hard and paid her bills and tried to be a good niece. The failure was not hers. Patricia sent me a letter 4 months after the settlement. It was 3 pages long. The first page was about how much they had sacrificed for me. The second page was about how the IRS audit had ruined Gerald's retirement plans. The third page was a question. It asked whether we could please find a way to be a family again. I read all 3 pages. I sat with them for 2 days. Then I wrote a single paragraph back. I said, Patricia, I genuinely hope you and Gerald find a way to stability and peace. I do not say that with sarcasm. I mean it as plainly as it sounds. But family is built on honesty and trust, and the arrangement we had for 9 years was built on neither of those things. I am not interested in reconstructing something on that foundation. I wish you well. I sent it. I blocked her email. Derek never contacted me. That was somehow both surprising and not surprising at all. My relationship with Marissa is the one piece of that family that survived. She and Marcus got married in the spring. It was a small ceremony in a garden in Savannah, and she asked me to be there, and I was. I stood in the second row in a yellow dress and watched her walk toward Marcus, and I cried the way you cry when something good is happening that also carries grief inside it, because good things can do that. At the reception, she found me at the bar getting a glass of sparkling water, and she hugged me and said, "Thank you for being here." I said there was nowhere else I would be. She said, "I know. That is the whole story. Or most of it. The daily details of rebuilding a life after 9 years of giving too much to people who took it without earning it are not dramatic. They are small. They are learning to spend money on yourself without guilt. They are canceling the automatic budgeting spreadsheet you built to cover rent you should never have been paying. They are sleeping without the low hum of financial anxiety that you had mistaken for normal. They are calling your coworker Dana to say thank you for casually mentioning something about a neighborhood in Atlanta that changed everything. I called Dana actually. About a month after the settlement. I took her to lunch and I told her the whole story. She sat across from me at a little Italian place on Peachtree, and her mouth was open for most of it. When I finished, she said, "Claire, I just mentioned that neighborhood in passing." I had no idea. "I know," I said. "That is sort of the whole point. The truth was already there. It just needed one ordinary conversation to let it in." She shook her head. She said, "You are the most composed person I have ever met." I laughed. I said, "I have had a lot of practice holding things together." She said, "Who taught you that?" I thought about my mother. I thought about the October she was diagnosed and the October she was gone. I thought about the woman who used to make me grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight when I could not sleep, and who told me that crying was not weakness, it was just water your body produced when it ran out of other options. I thought about how I had tried to carry her forward by being reliable and undemanding and easy to accommodate, and how that quality which she had given me as a gift had been used by people I trusted as a tool to extract $226,000 from me over 9 years. I thought about how she would have handled it. I think she would have been furious on my behalf. I think she would have cried. And then I think she would have made herself a very good cup of coffee and said, "Now what are we going to do about it?" I told Dana it was a long story. She said she had time. I started talking and the pasta arrived and the afternoon light came through the restaurant windows at that particular angle that makes everything look golden, and I thought, this is what the other side of something hard looks like. Not perfect. Not without loss. But real and warm and entirely mine. That is what I want you to take from this if you have made it this far. Not the settlement number. Not the IRS audit. Not the professional consequences for the people who spent 9 years treating me like a revenue stream with a niece attached. Those are just the mechanics of accountability, and accountability does not always feel as good as you expect it to once it arrives. What I want you to take is this. The truth was always there. It was sitting in a public county database waiting for anyone to look. What kept me from looking was not ignorance. It was grief and gratitude, and the particular kind of love that makes you want so badly to believe that the people you need also need you in return. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to verify things. You are allowed to look at the documents. You are allowed to sit at your laptop at 11 o'clock at night and type an address into a county records database because a coworker said something offhand over lunch and something in your chest went very still. You are allowed to know the truth. You are allowed to say it out loud. And you are allowed to build your life on what you find when you do. I am 34 years old. I have a balcony and a very good coffee maker and a savings account and a friend named Marissa who texts me pictures of her garden in Savannah, and a coworker named Dana who now knows my whole story and brings me lemon bars when I have a hard week at work, and a mother I carry with me everywhere I go. I have enough. I have more than enough. And not $1 of it belongs to anyone else.